Okay, I will start. This is the second lecture of the course Structural Reliability organized by the PMRF ISSS teaching program. I am Trisha Chakraborty, a second year PhD student at the Indian Institute of Science, Bangalore. We are looking at this course of structural reliability with a special emphasis or inclination towards civil engineering. Last class, we looked at review of probability theory and statistics. There we covered the axioms of probability, the total probability theorem, Bayes theorem, and we solved problems on that. And then we moved on to the concept of random variable, which is what statistics hinges on. The cumulative distributive function, the probability density function, CDF and PDF of a random variable, how to calculate the mean, variance, standard deviation, and coefficient of variation of a random variable when when there is only one random variable, and the various moments, the first, second, third, fourth moments. And then we looked at the statistical distributions of univariate common statistical distributions of univariate random variables, starting with the binomial theorem, binomial distribution, then the geometric, exponential, Poisson's, negative binomial, and the most important distribution of all, the normal distribution, which is what the central limit theorem says, that the sum of any number of random variables of a large number of random variables of any distribution tends towards the normal distribution. And these pictures are also of normal distributions. This is how this is a full log normal distribution. And so normal distribution we have such an emphasis on because in structural reliability calculations we mostly need to model the parameters of our system, loads, materials, and geometric properties, and several aspects of all these as random variables. And a normal distribution is a safe assumption for all of those, though if we have additional information about the nature of our parameter, we do choose several other modeling distributions, like the log normal distribution is often used for loads for capacities. Capacities mean the material properties or geometric properties. They can be modeled by normal or log normal. And if we are to be specific, loads are quite well modeled by some extreme value distributions, like the Gumbel, Weibull, and Frechet functions, Frechet distributions. We didn't go into the details of those state distributions, and we will look at the PDF and CDF of those as and when needed. And lastly, we looked at joint distributions because in our structural reliability, a basic assumption is often made that all our random variables are. One second. One basic assumption that we often take is that all the random variables are independent, but that is not practically what happens, because suppose we are modeling the density and the Young's modulus, or maybe the plastic moment capacity of I have a steel section. I have two random variables, among many. I have two random variables, yield stress and the plastic capacity. So they will actually not be independent because they have some sort of correlation. So that is why we need to study joint distributions and joint random variables when they are not completely independent. So we looked at joint distributions, joint CDFs, and the marginal PDFs, conditional probability, and so on. And today we are going to and okay, then I'll just start with the topics that we are going to be covered. Review of probability theory that we have already done. Today we are going to look at defining limit state functions and deriving partial safety factors. Partial safety factors come from the concept of limit state design that is followed by almost all the design codes in the world today. And design is is the ultimate goal of structural reliability. Like employing structural reliability, we would set certain safety standards that are to be incorporated in design codes of the world. Like the Indian standard codes still do not explicitly include structural reliability calculations, but several codes around the world, like the American codes, the AISC, the American Institute of Steel Construction, NCAISC, then the EN codes, the European codes, the code of Denmark, Netherlands. There are several codes in the world that explicitly incorporate safety standards calculated using structural safety calculations. Then we will look at simulation methods for studying reliability. Simulation methods, and there will be a special emphasis on Monte Carlo method, which is one of the simplest and easiest simulation methods, and also one of the most widely used. Monte Carlo simulations basically are that we are going to first we are going to define the distributions, including the distribution type, the mean and the variance, or the mean and the coefficient of variation of the parameters that we are considering to be not deterministic or random. The we have to set those distributions. Then we are going to simulate our system several times means a large number of times, like 10 to the power 5 times, 10 to the power 6 times. And every time we are going to generate our each random variable independently, or maybe they could be dependent if there is a correlation matrix. We are going to generate the system every time, and we are going to do the structural analysis. It may be a simplified form, it might include FEM, and it could also involve calling some other software like Abacus or ANSYS to solve the system, because we cannot always solve the system by hand or by coding. So then we are going to see if the structure, if my system fails or does not fail. And defining failure is also very crucial to structural reliability. We might not always say failure, call only the total collapse of the structure to be failure. There may be several other criteria or certain limit states. So I'm going to, for every simulation, I'm going to check whether the limit state is failing or surviving, and we are going to add up the number of failures over all the simulations. So of 10 to the power 5 simulations, if my structure fails 10 times, then the probability of failure will be 10 divided by 10 to the power 5. So 10 to the power minus 4, that will be my probability of failure. And from that I can get the reliability index beta that has some relationship with that, relating to the normal CDF function. And Monte Carlo methods, after that there will be some topics like variance reduction that helps us to get accurate results with lesser number of simulations. Then we are going to look at some analytical methods, the second moment and transformation methods for studying reliability. They are not simulation based, or they are not numerical based, they are analytical. And finally we are going to look at system reliability. The first uh, topics 2, 3 and 4 deal with, like, we are going to look at element reliability, like the failure, the limit states of a single element, the simulation of a single element, and so on. But in reality we don't actually deal just with elements, we deal with systems, right? Systems that are a collection of elements, where the elements are connected in such a way, in certain ways, logically, not just physically connected, they will be logically connected. For example, if we have a beam that is held by two rods, then it could be that even if one rod fails, the other rod will hold it up. So these two are said to be in parallel, because both of these need to fail for the system to fail. But if there are two cords attached end to end, two wires attached end to end, and then there is my beam or my body, then if just one fails, if one cord fails, the entire system will fail. So they are said to be connected in series. And of course all connections are not so simple that they are just connected in series or parallel. It is generally a mix of the two. And system reliability is related to system, it will include system identification and seeing how we can apply element reliability considerations to get the system reliability. And this is the course structure. The course structure. In module 1, we will look at review of probability theory, measures of structural reliability, partial safety factor, and limit state functions. We are going to complete module 2 today. Module 1 today. We already looked at the first topic yesterday. So yesterday and today consists module 1 of 2 classes. Module 2 will be next week, 2 classes, Wednesday and Thursday again. They will cover the types of uncertainty, risk assessment, probability of failure, integration and simulation methods that I talked about, with a special emphasis on Monte Carlo method and variance reduction techniques. Module 3 will be Wednesday of the next week, I think 2nd October. So, we will look at the analytical methods, the second moment and transformation methods that will include the Hasefer-Lind transformation, Netaf transformation, Rosenblatt transformation, and form and SOM, which are first order reliability methods and second order reliability methods. They are analytical methods for calculating structural reliability, while Monte Carlo methods are numerical methods. So, and the final class on 3rd October, I think, we will look at system reliability and the load material and system modeling, series and parallel systems, response surfaces. So, to wind up this course. And as I said, the focus on the application of reliability methods will be especially to civil engineering, because I am a civil engineer myself and I have worked on applying reliability into civil engineering, and that area is broadly sometimes called risk and reliability. Today's topic is measures of structural reliability. We will start with looking at limit states. So, the manner in which an engineering structure responds to loading depends on the type and magnitude of the applied load and the structural strength and stiffness. This we can understand intuitively. And whether the response is considered satisfactory depends on requirements that must be satisfied. These include safety of the structure against collapse, limitation on damage, deflections. Now, this term satisfactory is subjective. Like it is a call that the engineer has to take. It is not always black and white, like the structure is collapsing or the structure is not collapsing. It has a lot of aspects. For example, the deflection aspect. A limit state is basically, each such requirement is termed as a limit state. So, suppose I'm taking a concrete beam, there will be a collapse limit state that says that the beam should not collapse. So that means that the bending stress, or the maximum of the bending and the shear stress reached in any cross section of the beam should be less than the yield stress of the concrete material. That will be my collapse limit state. And with my deflection limit state, I could probably place a deflection limit on the midpoint of the beam. I could say that the deflection has to be less than 5 mm. So that will be another limit state. That is that generally strength or stiffness related limit states are known as collapse limit states, and deflection related limit states are known as serviceability limit states. So whether the response is considered satisfactory depends on the requirements, and these requirements are what we are setting. We could also say like limitation of damage. So we could also say that suppose I have a steel beam that has yield strength of 250 MPa and limit and ultimate stress of 410 MPa. I could probably set a limit of 300 on the stress to be generated. So I have to calculate the stress generated in the beam from all modes: bending, shear, torsion, web buckling and crushing, whatever method, whatever stress is getting generated on my beam. And this is where we are going to use steel design considerations, and that stress, the maximum of all those stress, has to be less than 300 MPa. 300 is a limit I am purely setting. So this is why whether a limit state is satisfied or not depends on the requirements that we are setting. And the violation of a limit state is defined as the attainment of an undesirable condition for the structure. Again, here is where the subjectivity comes in. And in structural reliability, defining failure is really important. So if a limit state is said to be failing, that means that my demand is getting less than my capacity. No, sorry, is exceeding my capacity. I want my capacity to be more than my demand. That means the limit state is not getting violated, it is holding. And if my demand exceeds the capacity, it is a violation or failure of a limit state. And that is why we need to define failure. These are some typical limit states for structures. There is the ultimate limit state or the collapse limit state. The description is a collapse of all or part of the structure. Some examples are tipping or sliding. For example, these are very important in soil structures or water retaining structures where there is a sliding or overturning kind of failure. There can be rupture, that is most commonly used in the context of steel. Progressive collapse is a term that actually has been studied a lot in last 100 years, maybe like the last century. So progressive collapse is where the trigger that begins the failure or collapse of the structure is very small, is disproportionately small compared to what actually happens, what happens by the time the structure has attained stability again. For example, there is a very famous failure where I think the Ronan Point. So there, what happened was, it was a building where there was a minor it was, I think, a 20-storied or something building, a 17-storied building, where a minor gas explosion at around the 14th floor, and it took out one column from the part, and the lady who was in the kitchen during the gas explosion wasn't even injured. So you can imagine that the gas explosion was very minor, but it took off one column, and from that initiated a failure where the entire that one side of the structure collapsed, and there were injuries and deaths in the lower floors. So that is a disproportionate failure compared to the triggering event, that is called progressive collapse. Plastic mechanism is again related to steel. Once the yield stress is exceeded, but the ultimate state hasn't been exceeded, a mechanism forms that a plastic hinge will form at some point, the point which is maximum stress, and it becomes a mechanism. So it is not stable anymore. Instability is again related to overturning kind of things. Corrosion, fatigue, deterioration, fire. These are some a little unconventional limit states, that they are not very commonly taken into consideration all the time, not as obvious as these ones. Then damage is another limit state, often included as ultimate. Sometimes we just class limit state as ultimate limit state and serviceability limit states. So damage will come in the previous category because it is related to the stresses and forces, not the deflections. And damage includes, examples are excessive or premature cracking, deformation or permanent inelastic deformations, and the serviceability limits it descriptions. Disruption is a description is disruption of normal use, excessive deformation, deflections, vibrations, local damage, etc. Vibrations become important in structures that are in earthquake prone zones, or in machine, or in factories with heavy load machines and all. And local damage is one thing that we would have seen in steel structures, that often there is no collapse as a whole, but there is a excessive deformation or sliding kind of thing in a local zone. In that case also, I might say that my limit state has failed. And these are some examples of devastating collapses in history. From observation, very few structures actually collapse. Violation of the most serious limit state is a relatively rare occurrence. The most serious limit state is obviously collapse of the entire structure. All other limit states we set before that threshold, so that if those limit states are not failing, then the structure will not collapse. And if it is collapsing, it means a violation of all limit state in a very serious condition. When violation of a limit state does occur, the consequences might be extreme. Some examples are the Tay Bridge, under that failed under wind loading, the Ronan Point floods, gas explosion, which I described before, the Kyland offshore platform, there were local strength problems, the Kobe earthquake that had ductility issues. Now, ductility again is a term that might be going in, because ductility is mathematically defined as the area covered under the stress strain curve of a material. The more it is, what it means is that the material allows a large amount of deformation before it actually fails. So that means that it gives a lot of warning time. And warning time is very important, especially in earthquake design, because if a building is about to collapse or nearing collapse, if there are warnings, if there is sufficient warning, for example, concrete spalling, like concrete blocks spalling, or extreme deformation, the structure swaying, that means that the people inside will get a chance to evacuate. And even if the structure eventually collapse, there will be there is a good chance of saving life. So that is what the first priority of structures are, that human life should be saved. And the second priority is, of course, that the structure must not collapse, because collapsing will lead to extreme economical consequences, but saving lives is our first priority. So ductility is very important in earthquake design. These are pictures. This is a Tay Bridge, this is the Ronan Point flats. This is what happened. The gas explosion occurred somewhere here. Then one column blew off, the floors above it collapsed, the floors above it, this part collapsed, the rest of the building is fine. And then once these collapsed, it led to a progressive chain reaction kind of thing, that the damage led all the way to the bottom floor. This is the Kyland offshore failure, and this is the aftermath of the Kobe earthquake. So, deterministic measures of limit state violation that will give rise to the factor of safety concept. The traditional method to define structural safety is through a factor of safety, usually associated with elastic stress analysis, which requires that sigma I of epsilon should be less than sigma pi, and that means that where sigma I of epsilon is the ith applied stress component calculated acting at a point epsilon in the structure, and sigma pi is the permissible stress for the ith stress component. So let us take the example of a steel beam again, or steel section. Sigma I is epsilon can be any point in the span of the beam, any point in the span along the span or depth of the beam. At that point, there is a certain kind of loading coming on the structure on my beam. So I can calculate the net stress developed at that point, considering all bending stress, shear stress, torsional stress, buckling stress, and all. It will get a resultant stress at that point. So sigma I of epsilon refers to that. And sigma pi is the permissible stress limit that I am setting. It might not be the ultimate stress. It might be a lesser. Of course, it cannot be more than the ultimate stress. So it could be the yield stress. It could be the ultimate stress. It could be something in between that we are setting. And is the this is what needs to be satisfied. Okay, that the stress developed in the material must be less than the permissible stress in the material. The permissible stresses sigma pi are usually defined in structural design codes derived from material strength, ultimate moment, yield point moment, squash load. All these come from all these considerations, and they're expressed in stress terms sigma ui, but reduced to a factor f, where f is a factor of safety. Now, this permissible stress is not the stress limit that I'm allowing. Sigma ui is the permissible is one of is that 410 maybe, or 250 maybe, that is divided by a factor f. And so the permissible stress is the allowed stress is less than the stress the structure can actually withstand. And why do we do this? It is a factor of safety. So I will even if my steel beam fails at 410 MPa, I'm going to apply a factor of safety in its denominator greater than 1. So I'm going to bring it down to some value like 350, and I'm not going to allow my permissible like my developed stress to go above 350 at all. So this is making my design safer. And this is the load factor. The load factor lambda is a special kind of safety factor, the theoretical factor by which a set of loads acting on the structure must be multiplied just enough to cause the structure to collapse. Commonly, loads are taken as those acting on the structure during service load conditions. Like, service load means that, for example, in a building we will take dead load, live load, wind load, earthquake load. Then in some offshore structures we have other loads like tidal loads and all. And for and the wind loads and earthquake loads will be different considering the area it is built in, or the height. Like wind is not a very important loading for short structures. So for tall structures like towers, like bridges, it is very important. And earthquake loads are, of course, they depend on the zone. For example, in India, the map of India is divided into zones, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. So 1 is the least severe zone and 5 is the most severe zone. Some areas like Bhuj that saw a terribly devastating earthquake last to last decade, they are in zone 5, I think. Kolkata is in zone 3, Bangalore is in zone 2. And the earthquake load that we are going to design it against depends on that zone factor, and that is given in the code. For a given collapse mode, that is for a given ultimate limit state and collapse mode are often used synonymously, and deflection modes are related to serviceability limit states. Now, for a given collapse mode, that is for a given ultimate limit state, the structure is considered to have failed or collapsed when the plastic resistances RPI are related to the factored loads uh, lambda Qj by WR of RR is less than equal to WQ of lambda Q, where Rp is the vector of all plastic resistances, that is plastic moments, and Q is the vector of all applied loads. Also, this function WR is the internal work function and WQ is the external work function. They're both described by plastic collapse mode being considered. In linear analysis, this WR and WQ might be ignored, and we mostly work in the linear zone. So this equation will reduce to RR should be less than equal to lambda Q. So RR is my resistance, and lambda q is the load. So uh, Q is my load, working load, and lambda is my load factor. That is that I am that is a factor greater than one, and I am multiplying it with the load. Why am I doing that? Because again, I am making it safer. That I am expecting a load of 10 kilonewton to come, but I am multiplying it by 1.5. So I am designing against 15 kilonewton meter. So if I am designing a structure against 15 kilonewton meter, even if something goes wrong, it is likely that it will hold up to 10 kilonewton meter, or in other words, I'm expecting 10 kilonewton meter to be the maximum force that will come, but something might go wrong and there might be a greater magnitude of force coming. So I want to account for all these uncertainties because we cannot predict it, right? We cannot predict that the load will exactly be this as I have estimated. We cannot say that the yield stress of my steel beam is exactly 250 MPa. It could be lesser because there are so many uncertainty factors like fabrication issues, corrosion, anything. So we have to incorporate uncertainties, especially when civil engineering structures are so crucial economically and for human life also. So loads Qj consists of several components such as dead load, live load, wind load, etc. So this is what we can say, that the internal work function acting on the resistances divided by the load factor multiplied by the external work function acting on all the loads added. They are algebraically being added, like dead load and live load are gravity loads, so they act in the downwards direction. The earthquake loads are the horizontal direction. So I have to find the stress for all of these, add them, and that is what will be the load, and that is equal to 1. Equal to 1 is when the limit state exactly satisfied. If the denominator is greater than the if the numerator is greater than the denominator, it means it's safe, and the other means it is failed. The partial factor for a limit state I, it can the partial safety factor can be expressed as the level of stress resultance, that is member level design, as phi I r I less than gamma di s di plus gamma li s li plus, and so on, taking all the load components, where r is the member resistance, phi is the partial safety factor on r. This is less than 1. Okay, partial safety factor on r will be less than 1, and SD, SL are the dead and live load effects respectively, with associated partial safety factors, gamma D, gamma L, etc. And these partial safety factors are not same for all types of loading. For example, dead load has higher, is generally has a safety factor of 1.5, but live load generally has 1.2 in concrete buildings, and there are also some other considerations. So we have to individually multiply the partial safety factor corresponding to that load type with the load, and then we are going to add them all up, and they should be basically less than the partial safety factor on the resistance multiplied with the resistance. This less than sign means that this limit state is failing. If the resistance, if the factored resistance is less than the factored force, factored loading, it means that this is failing. And why is this phi I less than 1? Because I want to approximate it on the safer side. For a plastic collapse analysis at the structure level, the formulation becomes, we will just apply the internal work function and the external work function on my resistance and demand. So, are there any questions right now? We will look at one example now. The structure shown is supported on two columns. The capacity of column B is R equal to 24 in compression. How can the safety of the structure be measured using the traditional factor of safety F? This is the horizontal loading. This is the gravity loading. The horizontal loading is at a height 10, and these are my columns. Each of the column has a compressional capacity of 24. this is unit. It is just taken in some unit, and these dimensions are given, these magnitudes are given. You have to assume all the units are compatible, and we have to measure the safety in terms of all modes of failure, not just the compressional mode. There has to be something around against overturning as well. Okay, so I'll wait for 5 minutes for you to try out this question. I'll wait for 2 more minutes. Let's look at the solution. The overturning resistance about A. This will have the a factor F1, resisting moment about A by divided by overturning moment about A. So this is my the numerator will be what is in favor of me, and the denominator will be what is against me. Me meaning the structure. So the resistance is D. Okay, if you look at the the overturning will occur about point A. So the overturning moment is this magnitude 10 into this distance, so 10 into 10, and this force as well, 4 into this distance, that is 5, because this is 10. So the denominator is 10 into 10 plus 4 into 5, and the resisting moment will come from this column, from this column. If when it is about to overturn, what will happen is, sorry, the overturning moment should be over, yes, it will happen is that this column is leaving the ground, and this column is completely this column is leaving the ground, so it has no, it is not stressed, and this column will reach its capacity 24. So 24 into 10, so the numerator will be 24 into 10, and the denominator will be 10 into 10 plus 4 into 5, that is 2. Capacity of column B. So it is a compression resistance of column B divided by compressive load on column B. So the compressive resistance is of course 24, and the load will be due to this 4 that is acting downwards. 2 will come here and 2 will come here, so column B will have 2, and due to the horizontal load and vertical load, and due to the horizontal load there will be a moment. It is an equal to an equal to a moment, that the moment is of such that on B it will act downwards and on A it will act upwards. So we are not concerned about A when we are looking at the compression limit state. We are concerned more about B, because in B the two loads are the effects of the two loads are adding up. So what will be this moment? This will be this 10 into 10 by 2, 10 into 10 divided by this, 10 into 10 is the moment, it is divided by the lever arm between the two, so it will be 10 into 10 divided by 10 and plus 2. So this is also 2, and net capacity of column B is resistance minus load effect of W. So that is the next net compression resistance of column B and net compressive load on column B. This is R minus W by 2 by H by D. R is 24, W by 2 is 2, capital H is 10, small h is also 10, and small d is also 10, so this is 2.2. So these are the factors of safety against each method of failure or each collapse limit state. Here we are not concerned about any kind of deflection limit state, but there could be in other questions, there could be, and that would also be another traditional factor of safety. Now we look at the return period. This is a very useful concept that is used in structural reliability, especially to in the modeling of all loads. So, in the historical development of engineering design, loads due to natural phenomena such as winds, waves, storms, flood, earthquakes, they are all quite like rare events. I mean severe winds. Wind that is there every day, but severe winds or severe waves in offshore structures, storms, floods, earthquakes, etc. were recognized quite early as having randomness in time as well as in space. We do not know where an earthquake is going to come, though we make those predictions, we make those zones of earthquakes depending on the tectonic plates and geological size studies. And in time also, we do not know when an earthquake is going to hit. Even in an earthquake prone zone, we do not know where it is going to hit. So there is that it has a randomness in time as well as in space. The randomness in time was considered in terms of the return period. The return period is defined as the average or expected time between two successive statistically independent events. Technically, if there is an earthquake at a place in 2000 and then there is an earthquake, a severe earthquake in 2020, they are independent, statistically independent. The two events occurring, the two earthquakes occurring, even if they're in the same place, they are independent. And there is this time between these two were supposed 20 years, but that is not what the return period is. The return period is the average or the expected time between the between the two earthquakes. So this has something to do with the mean. If this is modeled as a random variable, the mean of the random variable will be this return period. Though the actual time t between events is a random variable. For independent, if it is modeled as a random variable, it will have one fixed mean, right? One value, so that will be that return period. For independent samples from a population, that is from a Bernoulli trial sequence. I didn't mention Bernoulli yesterday, but Bernoulli trial is what one tossing one coin is basically. That is a Bernoulli trial, so it has two outcomes, heads or tails. And the trial t on which the first occurrence of an event takes place is given by the geometric distribution. That is what we discussed. Geometric distribution is a discrete distribution which describes the first occurrence of an event. Like if you are tossing a coin repeatedly, the first occurrence of a tail or the first occurrence of a head could be is described by a geometric distribution. This states that the probability that the first occurrence occurs on the tth trial is P capital T equal to T. This is the probability mass function of the geometric distribution, P into 1 minus P to the power T minus 1. T can go from 1 to anything to up to infinity, where P is the probability of occurrence of that event. Example, capital X equal to greater than small x in any one trial, and 1 minus P is the probability that the event does not occur. Let us just go back to the slides of previous day once. Geometric distribution. This is how the PM probability mass function was defined. P capital N equal to small n is P into 1 minus P to the power n minus 1. And why was this? Because this means that if P is the favorable event whose first occurrence I'm concerned about, if the first occurrence is occurring at the small nth trial, that means in all the previous n minus 1 trials, unfavorable event occurred. So the probability of the unfavorable event is 1 minus P. 1 minus P has to be raised to the power of small n minus 1. And on the small nth trial, my favorable event is occurring, so we have to multiply it with 1p. That is how the probability mass function here comes. That is what. So p is the probability of the occurrence of the event. Here it is not technically favorable, it is the occurrence of this event, of what I am looking at, of the event and a study basically. And in one trial, and 1 minus p is the probability that the event does not occur. If trials are interpreted as time intervals, during each of which only the occurrence of events x greater than small x is recorded, the first occurrence of an event becomes the first occurrence time. This is just terminology. The mean recurrence time or the return period is then the expected value of t. T is my random variable, which is modeled as a geometric distribution, and the return period is the mean value of t. So we know how to calculate mean. Let us go back again to the to the previous slide. This is the first moment. What we do here is to find the mean. It is a weighted average of all the values that a random variable can take. For discrete, this is for continuous random variables. This is for discrete random variables. We have to sum xi pxi over all i's possible. So what we are doing here is exactly the same thing. We are taking t, and then we are taking the probability mass function, and we are summing over all t. T can go from 1 to infinity. So this is p in brackets 1 plus 2 into 1 minus p plus 3 into 1 minus p square plus 4 into 1 minus sorry, I think there will be the p is here is taken as common. So inside 1 plus 2 into 1 minus p plus 3 into 1 minus p square plus 4 into 1 minus p cube and so on. And from geometric progression, we know that the sum will be this: p divided by 1 minus 1 minus p whole squares, or 1 by p. This is the 1 minus c, the CDF inverse, where this is the where fx of x is a cumulative distribution function CDF of x. So this expected value of my random variable t is the return period. So suppose a structure is subjected to a 50-year wind of 60 kilometer per hour velocity. One second. Okay, calculate if we are looking at the return period related to this. The return period for 60 kilometer per age wind is here 50 years, because 50-year wind means the return period is 50 years. The probability of exceeding 60 kilometer per hour in any 1 year is p is 1 by t. Here we saw that the expected value, this return period is 1 by p, and p is the occurrence of the event. So p is 1 by t, t bar, so that is 1 by 50. There is 0.02, and that is 2% basically. So the probability of exceeding 60 kilometer per hour in any 1 year is 2%. The probability of exceeding the design wind velocity, we greater than 60 for the first time during the fourth year is, see, if it is, see, I know that the probability of it exceeding 1 year is 2%. So if it is exceeding the my limit for the first time in fourth year, what it means is that in the first year it did not exceed. So the first year has a probability of 0.98. It is, then the second year it again didn't exceed, and in the third year it again didn't exceed. So 0.998 into to the power 3, and in the fourth year it does exceed, so 0.02. So this is what p into 1 minus p to the power n minus 1, that is what is happening. My n here is 4, my p is 0.02, and 1 minus p is 0.98. So this is the probability of it exceeding the design wind velocity for the first time during fourth year. The probability of exceeding the design wind velocity in only one of the years in a 4-year period. So what all possibilities it does, it includes, if in 4 years I know that it has exceeded one time, so but I do not know when that one happened. Unlike in the previous question, we know that it did not exceed in the first 3 years and it did exceed in the fourth year. So it is a geometry distribution. But this is a binomial distribution because the arrangement can be anything. There can be, it could be exceeded in the first year and the next 3 years it could not be exceeded. It could be exceeded in the second year and the first, third and fourth year could be safe. So this additional term is multiplied is 4c1. So it is the same probability, but the rest is same, 0.02 into 0.98 cubed. So this is the same as the previous probability multiplied by 4, because that year could be the first year or the second year or the third year or the fourth year. So it gets multiplied by 4. You can see 0.01882 into 4, 0.01882 into 4 is 0.0528. So this is then the probability of exceeding the design wind velocity during any of the years in a 4-year period is given by the geometric distribution. Uh, any of the years, that means that it could be anything. So it can be 1, 2, 3, or 4. My value of t can be 1, 2, 3, or 4. That it is getting exceeded in any year, or it could be more than 1 year as well. But it has been exceeded at least once. So my small t ranges from 1 to 4, 1, 2, 3, 4. So I have to sum it over 0.02 into 0.98 to the power t minus 1, and this is my result. P t less than equal to 4 is 1 minus p. It means that you can also go to approach it from the reverse way, that if it has been exceeded at least once, it means that it is a complement of the event that it is not exceeded any of the 4 years. So 0.98 to the power 4 is the event that it is not exceeded in any year, and the complement of that 1 minus 0.98 to the power 4 is this event that I am trying to find the probability of. This is 0.0776. And are there any questions regarding this? we'll move on to the next topic, formulating the basic reliability problem mathematically. The basic structural reliability problem consists of only one load effect S resisted by only one resistance R, which is a very simplified and approximated version of looking at it, because there will, even in one element, there will be several limit states, several limit states considerations. There will be more than one load. There will be several resistance considerations. This is a very simple formulation that is how we are going to start at this and then expand it. Each is described by a known probability density function. Now this is the Fs and Fr are the probability density function of the load and the resistance. S may be obtained from the applied loading Q through a structure analysis, either with deterministic or random components. Basically, the load effect, S is a load effect. So, and Q is a load. So, suppose there is a beam on which I am only considering the bending moment. So, the bending moment problem. So, my load is, suppose there is a uniformly distributed load, that is a load, and the load effect is the stress developed in the structure, in the beam. How do we find that out? We are going to find the maximum bending moment that will occur at the midpoint. If it is a simply supported beam, it will be WL square by 8, and from that we are going to find the bending stress at the extreme fiber, that will be My by I. Using the formula, we will get a stress. That is my load effect S here, and my resistance will be the yield stress of the concrete or steel, whatever the beam is. R and S must be expressed in the same units. If my resistance I'm saying of steel 250 ampere, then I have to express my load effect as also a stress of unit megapascal. Without loss of generality, only the safety of a structural element will be considered here, and as usual, that structural element will be considered to have failed if its resistance R is less than stress resultant S acting on it. This is what I have been saying, and which is very easy to understand as well. That a limit state is safe if the resistance is more. A limit state has failed if the resistance is less than the stress resultant S. And S, so the R is also often called the capacity, and S is also often called the demand. So resistance and resistance, capacity, and load or demand. And the probability PF of, okay, the probability PF of failure of the structure element can be stated in any of the following ways. This PF is the probability of R less than equal to S, where R and S are both random variables. So we are going to take the S to the left hand side. So R minus S less than equal to 0, or we can write it as R by S less than equal to 1, and taking log on both sides, we write ln R minus ln S is less than equal to 1, or in general P of G of Rs is less than equal to 0. So this G of Rs is this R minus S. That is my limit state, where G, this is a function of R and S, is termed the limit state function, and the probability of failure is identical with the probability of limit state violation. Simple as that. And this is PF is probability of R minus is less than equal to 0, and then we are going to invoke the joint density function FRS of R and S. We are going to integrate them over ds and d as dr and ds over the entire domain. D is the entire domain from which are my variation of resistance and my variation of load. In most cases, this will probably be greater than 0. Or we can also write like this: P probability of R minus is less than equal to 0 is minus infinity to infinity frx fsx if they are independent in dx minus infinity to infinity. And this is another way I can write it, is that probability of, oh sorry, this is the CDF function. Fr is the CDF function, Fs is the density function. I can also write it as minus infinity to infinity 1 minus fx x fr dx dx. So what does this mean? That fr is that the x is less than equal to r, and I am integrating over x, and here it means that 1 minus fs, so it means that s is greater than x. That is what it means. So that means x is less than s, and fr into x dx over minus infinity to infinity. This I could come down, narrow down the domain if I have additional knowledge about it, but in general we are integrating it over the entire real domain. Now we are going to look at the special cases. As I keep saying, that the normal distribution is very valuable. Why? Because For a few distributions of RNS, it is possible to integrate the convolution integral analytically. For example, when both R and S are normal random variables. So what does this mean? That if I assume that these R and S here were random variables, right? So if I assume that they are normally distributed, then this calculation becomes really easy. Plus, it is also a very sensible approximation. So it is not a random approximation that makes no sense. So I can actually model the resistance and the load effect as a normal distribution and get decent results. And it also makes the calculation easier. So that is why they're often do they're often assumed to be that. So I'm taking this R and S are normally distributed, and to define my distribution, what else do I need? I need at least two amongst the mean and the variance. Or the mean, variance, standard deviation, covariance, I need at least two. So I'm assuming that the mean of my resistance is mu R, and my mean of my road effect is mu S, and the variances are sigma square R and sigma square X respectively. I've said before that last class that we say sigma square for the standard deviation, for the variance, because square root of the variance is the standard deviation, and standard deviation is denoted by sigma R and sigma S. So we write sigma square. And the safety margin, this is another term that we are defining. The safety margin Z is R minus S. So since I want R to be greater than S, the magnitude of this R minus S, however, the larger it is, the safer my system is, right? Because R equal to S is the borderline case, R greater than X is my favorable case, R less than S is when the limit state is failing. So the safety margin is defined as R minus X, not the other way around. You cannot write it as X minus R, S minus R. And the safety margin will have mean and variance. We know that normal distributions have these properties, that the mean of a function of two normal distributions added or subtracted algebraically is this, that if mu z is equal to mu r minus mu s. So, and if it was 3, if suppose there was a scalar factor, if r and s were multiplied with some scalar factor, suppose it was 3r minus 2s, just saying, then the mean would be 3 mu r minus 2 mu s. That is the property, the linear mean property of normal distribution. So this I am able to do only because R and S are both normally distributed, and that is why Z is also normally distributed. It won't hold for other. If R is geometrically distributed and S is geometrically distributed, it does not mean that Z will be geometrically distributed, and these properties might also not hold. And to get the standard deviation, what happens is sigma square Z is equal to sigma R square, sigma square R and sigma square S. And suppose there were factors, if there was a factor, note here that it is plus. The standard, the variance never cancels out each other. Variance always adds up. So if it was 3r minus 2s, then this variance would be 3 square into sigma square r plus 2 square into sigma square s. So here the algebra, it is not just the factor is 1, so it is simple. So the probability of failure is probability of r minus s less than equal to 0. This is what I have defined here. Probability of r minus s equal to less than equal to 0. And I have defined r minus s as z. So I want probability of z less than equal to 0. And this is a normal variable. Z is a normally distributed random variable. So this is the CDF, the normal CDF of a random variable with mean mu z and standard deviation z sigma z. So this phi is the standard normal distribution function. It has zero mean and unit variance. So this has normal distribution tables that are available on the internet to get these values. And in this I have to substitute the value 0 minus mu z by sigma z. 0 comes from here. Mu z is the mean and sigma z is the standard deviation, not the variance. This is my probability of failure. And my probability of failure is I'm putting the value of mu z and sigma z in terms of mu r, in terms of my resistance and load factors, is minus mu r minus mu s divided by sigma square s plus sigma square r whole root. And this is the phi of minus beta, where beta equal to mu z by sigma z is defined as a safety index. This is all the reliability index. This is a very important term, and this can also be written as PF is 1 minus uh, this phi of beta. Sorry, we have beta is 1 minus phi inverse of PF. this is a visual representation. Z is my safety margin, mu z is the mean. Suppose this is a normal distribution, because I have, since R and S are both normally distributed, Z will also be normally distributed. There are sigma Z, at some point there will be sigma z on both sides. It is asymmetric about this, and this is where z is equal to 0. So I want, so this is my distribution of z, and this is the failure region, and this is the safety region. The entire this part is safe because z is greater than 0, and this is z is less than 0, so it is failure. So it is written here failure and safety on this side of this axis, and this is the density of z, and beta sigma z, this value will be beta into sigma z, so this will be 1 minus beta into sigma z. Are there any questions about this part? Okay, we are going to look at another example. A simply supported timber beam of length 5 meter is loaded with a central load Q. It is a point load acting at the center point, having mean mu Q equal to 3 kilonewton, and variance sigma square Q is 1 kilonewton square. This unit is kilonewton square because standard deviation has a unit as the original random variable, and variance has a unit of its squared. The bending strength of similar beams has been found to have a mean strength mu r equal to 10 kilonewton meter with a coefficient of variation of 0.15. If we want to evaluate the probability of failure, I'll wait for 5 minutes for you to work it out. we'll look at solution. We are going to assume that the beam self-weight and any variation in the length of the beam is ignored. From basic structural theory, the applied moment, the load effect S at the center of the beam due to the load Q is given by QL by 4, because Q is applied at the midpoint. The reactions at the two end of the of the supports will be Q by 2, Q by 2, and the moment is the force divided by the lever arm. So QL Q by 2 into L by 2. So it is QL by 4. Since L equal to 5, it follows that the mean load effect and the variance of SR. Mu S is 5 by 4 mu Q equal to 5 by 4 into 3 is 3.75 kilonewton meter. Sigma S square is 5 by 4 square. Sigma q square is 25 by 16 into 1.56 kilonewton meter whole square. So the mean resistance and invariance are 10 kilonewton meter, as here it is given, that the mean resistance is 10 kilonewton meter and the COV is 0.15, and COV 0.15 means that the standard deviation will be 0.15 into 10, and the variance will be the square of that, so it is 2.25 kilonewton meter square. So now I move to the safety margin, the parameters of the safety margin. Mu z is mu r minus mu s, 6.25, and the variance of z is the sum of the variance of the two. So from what the formulas we have learned just now, beta is mu z by mu q, mu z by sigma z, that is 3.2, and probability of failure is the normal CDF of minus 3.2, that is 7 into 10 to the power minus 4. This 7 into 10 to the power minus 4 is got from normal CDF tables. Now we are going to move on to another topic, safety factors and characteristic values. The traditional deterministic measures of limit state violation, namely the factor of safety and the load factor, can be directly related to the probability PF of limit state violation. Traditional, we have already looked at factors of safety and the load factor, and now we have looked at how the probability of failure is calculated. They can be related. If it is useful to get them related, see how they relate to each other. Analytically, this is demonstrated most easily for the basic one resistant one load effect case that we talked about now, where R and S or Q, S is the load effect and Q is the actual load. They are normally distributed. That always makes calculations easier. Consider a convenient simple safety measure, sometimes referred to as a central safety factor lambda 0, and it is defined as mu R by mu S or mu R by mu Q. Generally, some upper range value of applied load or stress is compared with some lower range value of strength of material. Such values might be termed characteristic values, reflecting that in conventional usage. For example, in design, the load or strength is described only by its value. Characteristic yield strength of steel bars is the strength that most bars will exceed, a finite but small probability that some bars will have a lower strength. So, suppose, and this 95% is a percentile. That 95 percentile means that if the 95 percentile yield stress is 250, that means that 95%, if I take 100 random samples of that material, 95 out of those will have yield stress grade 250 or more, but 5 will have lesser. So that is how the characteristic value is termed. It is not the 100 percentile, is it a 95th percentile? This is just a convention. And this is another example for a random variable S with mean 60 and coefficient of variation 0.2. The 95 percentile for the Gumbel distribution can be determined here. Gumbel is an extreme value distribution type 1. This is the CDF. Okay, exponential minus e to the power minus alpha y minus u. U is my variable. U and alpha will have values. So alpha squared is pi squared by 6, sigma y square. So this is how the alpha parameter is related to the standard deviation, and this is how the u parameter is related to the mean and alpha, and gamma is taken standard at this. So this is how we are going to get alpha and u in terms of these parameters mu y and sigma y. So sigma y is sigma s is given as, see, this is the coefficient of variation 0.2. So the standard deviation will 0.2 into 60. So that is 12. And mu y equal to mu s equal to 60. So alpha is pi by root 6 divided by 12. This was alpha square. So alpha is pi by root 6 into sigma y. That is pi by root 6 divided by 12. And this is my value of alpha, and u is 60 minus 0.57722 divided by alpha that we have already calculated, that is 54.6. So 0.95 is 0.95 percentile means that the CDF will be equal to 0.95 for what value of y. That is what we are going to find. We are basically finding, and y here is s, my random variable. So 0.95 is equal to exponential in brackets minus e to the power minus 0.1069, that is the value of alpha, bracket in brackets s minus 54.6, that is the value of u. So s we can solve here by, we will take the logarithm first. We will take the logarithm of 0.95, that will be a negative value, negative quantity. Then we are going to take the logarithm again and get this value. So we are taking the logarithms to remove the exponential from the expressions. Now, so far we have looked at a basic reliability problem where both the distributions were both the resistance and the load were normally distributed. Now we are going to try to generalize it. For many problems, the simple formulations shown above are not entirely adequate, since it may not be possible to reduce the structural reliability problem to a simple S versus R formulation with R and S as independent random variables. And there, as I said, there can be several limit state considerations. In general, R is a function of material properties and element on structural dimensions, while S is a function of applied loads, Q, material densities, and perhaps dimensions of the structure, each of which may be a random variable. All of these, each of the material properties like density, Young's modulus, Poisson's ratio can be random. The structural dimensions, each of those can be random. The dimension, the width and height, width and depth of a beam, the length of a beam, the floor to floor height, anything, all of these can be random variables. And similarly the applied loads, all of each of those can also be random. RNS may not be independent either. For example, when some loads act to oppose failure, like overturning, then the load itself is a one random variable, and the resistance is related to the load, so they are not independent. Or when the same dimensions affect both RNS, that is also very common. Like for example, in this question that we saw here, the resistance, the R L here depends on force here, load here depends on the length L. And if the resistance, sometimes the resistance can also be can be a can be a function, like it can vary up along the length of the beam. In that case, the resistance will also vary with length. So that can be an example, and a more general formulation is required. The first step is to define the variables involved in the generalized reliability problem. There can be many of them, and we physically it is not possible to model all of them. So we have to take a call about. We have to take some approximations. The basic variables could be the fundamental variables that define and characterize the behavior and safety of a structure may be termed as the basic variables. Usually, they are the variables employed in conventional structural analysis and design: dimensions, densities or unit widths, materials, loads, material strength. For example, the compressive strength of concrete. Compressive and tensile strengths and the elastic modulus of concrete are related, yet in a particular analysis they might be treated as a basic variable, because dependence between basic variables usually adds some complexity to a reliability analysis. Of course, if all my random variables are considered to be discrete, to be independent of each other, then the joint density function will be just multiplication of each of the terms, each of the density functions. So that is a very easy way of doing the analysis, and we sometimes take a call about this. We make some simplifying assumptions that may not exactly be realistic, but we see that it is fine. We are getting a fairly accurate result in return of saving a lot of computational effort, so that is valid. It is important that the dependent structure between dependent variables should be known, and they should be expressible in some form, usually through a correlation matrix. We will look at this later in this course, what a correlation matrix is. But in statistics, it is a matrix that is where if there are n random variables, there is an n by n matrix where the diagonal terms are the variance of all of the n random variables, and the off diagonal terms are the correlation coefficients between the each two terms, like 1 and 2, 1 and 3, 1 and 4, like that. The probability distributions to be assigned to the basic variables depend on the knowledge that is available. If it can be assumed that past observations and experience for similar structures can be used validly for the structure under consideration, the probability distributions might be inferred directly from such observed data. Now, this mean, standard deviation, or the distribution, whatever we are defining, we are getting that from experience, and this experience is definitely like observed data of similar structures is definitely a very important very important examples on which we can base our assumptions on for a new structure. More generally, subjective information may be employed or some combination techniques may be required. For example, in practice, some subjective influence is nearly always present, since only seldom are sufficient data available to identify unambiguously only one distribution is the most appropriate. So there is some a subjective influence. One structural engineer might choose normal distribution, one might choose log normal distribution. Sometimes physical reasoning may be used to suggest an appropriate probability distribution as well. Where a basic variable consists of terms of many other variables which are not explicitly considered, we will invoke the central limit theorem to suppose that a normal distribution is appropriate. Now, just we look at that again. We have looked at that in the previous class. That is why the first lecture is important as a basic or prerequisite for this course. This is the central limit theorem. It states that the probability distribution, the probability distribution for the sum of a large number of random variables, irrespective of the individual distributions of the random variables, approaches the normal distribution. So that is what we are using here. We are invoking the central limit theorem and approximating the sum as a normal distribution. This reasoning would be appropriate for the compressive strength of concrete, many component strength, and for the dead load of a beam and or slab, again many components of weight and several dimensions. In another example, the maximum wind velocity per year might be represented by the extreme value distribution type 1 Gumbel, as this is based on an underlying wind phenomenon that at any instantaneous point in time can be considered described as essentially normal in probability distribution. That is how the Gumbel distribution is described. Okay, we are nearly at the end of this, so we will just look at the generalized limit state equations. While the basic variables and the probability distributions established, the next step is to replace the simple r minus n s form of a limit state function with a generalized expression expressed directly in the terms of basic variables. Let the vector x represent all the basic variables involved in the problem. This is a vector. It can consider my Poisson's ratio, modulus of elasticity, wind load, dead load, dimensions, everything, all of that individually. Then the resistance R can be expressed as R is GRX, and the loading or load is S as GS of X. The both are a function of the basic variables. Since the functions gr and gs may be nonlinear, the CDF fr must be obtained by multiple integration over the relevant basic variables. So to get the CDF, we know that CDF is an integration of the PDF. So I have to integrate it. See, integrating over x, dx here means that all that if there are five parameters that I'm considering, then this will be a five-dimensional integration. So I will dx1, dx2, dx3, dx4, dx5 over all of the domains. We have to integrate the joint distribution function, the joint density function. Fx is a joint density function of all my basic variables. And the reliability problem formulation with the limit state function expressed as g of x, and the generalization becomes PF is probability of GF less than equal to 0. That is what probability of failure is, right? That limit state should be violated. That means that the limit state should have value less than equal to 0. So we are integrating this over just this domain. Here we were integrating over the entire domain of the basic variables. Here we integrate over the domain such that g of x is less than equal to 0. Here fxx is the joint probability density function of the n-dimensional vector x of basic variables that I said. Resistance R and load effects S are not shown here explicitly, but all of these are implicit in this vector x. It consists of all of those. If the basic variables are all independent, the formulation is simplified. We know that the joint probability density function of n variables, if all n are independent, are simply the multiplication of the marginal density function of all of those. So this is what happens: is fx of x is the multiplication of fxi of x. So fx1, fx2, fx3, they will be just multiplied up to n, and where fxi is the marginal probability density function of the basic variable I. This is just like univariate conditional reliability problems. The probability estimate given in the previous slide becomes conditional when complete statistical information about the random variable x is not available. For example, the means or the variances might be estimated or not known with precision. Then the probability expressed is a point estimate given at a particular set of assumption about the probability distribution for x. So whatever I am calculating hinges about the hinges on the assumption. So making a different set of assumptions and following the same technique will lead to different probability of failure or a different reliability index. So that is why it is a conditional reliability problem. The net result is that the probability can now be expressed as a conditional probability estimate. This expression is that pf of theta. Theta is my underlying assumption. So pre assume a priori the factors that we are assuming a priori. So it is an integration of this conditional density function over this domain of the failure of the limit state over dx. And finally, we are looking at to summarize, the concept of limit state is a formalization of the possibly multiple criteria under which the structure can be considered to have failed or reached an unsatisfactory state. It depends on how I define failure. Traditional measures of limit state violations were reviewed, including the factor of safety, the load factor, and possible limit state design concepts. Another common measure, the return period, was reviewed before looking at a fully probabilistic measure of limit state violation. And so that's all for today. If you have any questions. Yeah, then I will end this session.